Hello everybody, this is Blake here and welcome to my list of favorite movies of 2014. Why did I not have this video out last month, back when it still would have been relevant? Because shut up. Now seriously, I wasn't originally going to do this. I had put out my written list of my favorite movies of the year, but I decided I wasn't going to spend any time scripting and filming and editing a video because that would take a couple weeks, and it would certainly eat away at the time I'd usually be spending on critiquing the critics, which is currently in limbo. I have to get that done by the end of this month, but I'm still in the writing process. I'm not thoroughly happy with the second half of the script, so I'm still working on that, and I just decided I'd take a break and get in front of the camera and talk about some movies I genuinely loved. Now, if you read my list or just follow me enough to where you should know my feelings towards this year, 2014 sucked for me. This has been one of the only years I could think of where my list of really bad movies exceeded the list of really good movies. That usually does not happen because generally there is a reason why a film gets released in theaters. There's something I'll usually be able to grab a hold of and make that into the film's only redeeming factor. So generally it's production values. Even bad movies can be made mediocre if they have really good special effects, and therefore it will usually avoid or evade my wrath. And just for whatever reason, most of the big releases just didn't please me that much. I mean, I thought like Godzilla, X-Men First Class, or not First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past. Those are movies that they were good, don't get me wrong, but they weren't great. I had higher expectations for them, maybe even too high. But so even though they were pleasant experiences, they didn't blow me away like I hoped they would. I've heard that the more highbrow releases were really good this year, such as Birdman or I don't know, or the majority of them that have come out. But I usually just don't go to the theaters to watch those kinds of movies. I probably should, but I'm a very, very shallow audience member. So I'm just referring to the kinds of movies I would watch. And plus, if you're interested in, like, sometimes when I see a movie that came out in 2014 that I did think was great, I might go ahead and edit that into my written list, which I've already done. So, just follow me on Twitter or Facebook, where I will keep you updated whenever I decide to update that. Great use of words, Mr. Writer. So let me just pull up my list, and I shall start from the beginning. So there were only 9 movies of 2014 that really excelled, in my opinion. And I just want to also emphasize, this list is based on my personal reaction to them. It's not their objective quality. Some people can do that and get away with it. I just don't think I can, based on my tastes alone, because I'm just going to, once again, like, for me, the most important thing is how I respond to them, my personal reaction. And so I don't really want to cause this big debate. Feel free to express your opinions, but I'm not going to say my number 1 choice is necessarily better than my number 9th choice, because objectively most people will probably disagree with me. But at the same time, I was at my most enthusiastic with my number 1 choice, and that's why I went with that. Okay, so only 9 great movies, in my opinion. Number 9 goes to Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal. The entire narrative of that movie is based around the performance of Gyllenhaal, and he is phenomenal. He's both creepy, even kind of scary at times, but always fascinating to watch. And there's some great dark comedy surrounding this character because Jake Gyllenhaal just nails every important note. This is one of the few movies where the suspense is driven almost entirely by the acting. You don't see that very often, especially these days. But it was enough to invest me and kept me intrigued in where it would go all the way up until the very end. And even though the film has a very unsatisfying ending, it was intentionally so. It's meant to frustrate you, and in a way, I wouldn't have had it any differently. It's part of the film's identity, and for those who wonder if my tastes are really lowbrow, that is actually pretty much a film designed to please the critics, but it is just really, really good. So even somebody like me can enjoy it. So, and one thing too, if you haven't seen these movies, really consider what I'm saying and don't just go based on my overall opinion, because certain entries on this list I might think are great, but they might not just be your cup of tea. So if you're not really into slower paced movies that rely more on performances than on spectacle, then perhaps Nightcrawler isn't for you. But if you think that is your kind of movie, definitely check it out, although you probably already have. Number 8 goes to Fury, the Brad Pitt tank movie. I just thought this movie was cool. But at the same time, it is very, very disturbing. One thing I like about Fury is that it's a film almost designed for mainstream audiences, but the director approaches it as if it's some sort of highbrow artistic movie. The cinematography and the way various scenes are framed and staged, it's very poetic and beautiful and haunting all at once. And yet, at the same time, the narrative, it's almost all action or just really intense scenarios, and it's the perfect blend of something for the masses, general audiences who just want spectacle, but also people who want something more. So everybody, I think, should check that one out, unless you really don't like war movies. But as a war film, it's very bleak. It's very dark and gritty, but there is genuine emotion driving it, and even when it gets a little manipulative, it still left that impression on me. Number 7 goes to John Wick. Maybe I should have said that this was the one that's really cool. John Wick is not as deep as the previous 2 movies. It's just a straight-up action movie, but it's an action movie with color. I thought the characters were very fun and interesting to watch. The actors are all having a great time portraying these characters. Keanu Reeves is not the most expressive person in the world, but he fits perfectly within this role. The dialogue, really clever. I love just the little quirks of the screenplay, like having a hotel just for assassins where they could feel safe. That I thought was really neat and interesting. And the action scenes, the gun fu, just really well choreographed, very nicely paced. It's an action film with personality, and you don't see that very often anymore. The reason why I put it above the other 2 is, well, simply because I enjoyed it more. But also, with Nightcrawler, I don't think I'd necessarily watch it again. And in the case of Fury, I will watch it again, but there were still moments that I didn't care for, where I thought the film was once again being a little bit too emotionally and manipulative, where John Wick knows exactly what it is and never really let down in that regard. So definitely check out John Wick if you're into action movies. It's too bad that film wasn't a smash at the box office. It really deserved a lot of money, because you just don't see many action films like that anymore. Number 6, Guardians of the Galaxy, one of my favorite Marvel films, and that means quite a bit, rivaling the Avengers and Iron Man. Guardians of the Galaxy, there's really nothing I could say that nobody else would have already said, or maybe I probably could have worded that better, but great special effects. There's a lot of effort put into designing these various special effects, so it doesn't just look pretty. There's something very creative about its visual style, and I just liked the various designs of the ships, the locations, the like when the spaceships start kind of forming this net slash shield. That was very unique and cool. Phenomenal action sequences, and yet it's also driven by very entertaining characters who say and do very entertaining things, and yet the film also, like John Wick, has a certain quirkiness to it that helps it stand out. It is, in its own way, very different from the other Marvel movies, while also sharing a lot of this, or sharing really all the same strengths as them. So that's probably like the perfect kind of summer blockbuster for me, and I really enjoyed it. Number 5 goes to Edge of Tomorrow. Now, the reason why I put Edge of Tomorrow above Guardians of the Galaxy is that I felt that there was a little bit more substance here, more of a rewatchability factor, and that, I'm not saying that those other films don't have that going for it. It's just I'm talking why I put it Edge of Tomorrow even more so. To me, it was just a really smart, exciting action thriller that was very darkly humorous, and I just it always knew how to play off my emotions. It knew how to make me, sad and inspired, and at the same time laugh in the most awkward manner possible. But like when I say something is smart, it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be holes or moments that are a little illogic. It just comes down to how ambitious it is, and how's a better way to phrase that? Because when you think about it, As Above, So Below was ambitious, and that was a pretty stupid movie. But it feeds into its ambitions. I wouldn't have really changed anything that movie did, even if, like, for example, I watched a video from yourmoviesucks.org, and they point out a lot of the holes in that narrative, and I understand where they're coming from, but to me they didn't really detract from the narrative. I was just always impressed with the decisions this movie made, and maybe I'm being a little easy because it is a summer action movie that above everything wants to entertain. It's more designed to just entertain us instead of stimulate us intellectually. But still, I thought that overall gave the film some flavor. And above everything these days, I'm sick of mediocrity. I'm sick of blandness. I want a movie that's going to stick out for better or worse. And Edge of Tomorrow really stood out for me. And it probably helps too. I wasn't expecting a lot. I wasn't the biggest fan of Oblivion, which I thought was kind of average, and I felt Edge of Tomorrow just seemed like a rehashed version of that at first. But then once I saw the movie, why was I even really comparing the two? They're totally different. So Edge of Tomorrow I thought was a really good, even great sci-fi action thriller. Number 4 goes to A Walk Among the Tombstones, which is interesting because when I first saw A Walk Among the Tombstones, I wasn't blown away by it. I really, really did like it. I thought it was a really good movie, but I noticed on my In Theaters Now section of my website that I had only given it like 3.25 of stars, whereas most of the films on these lists are at least 3.5. But the more I thought about it, the more it grew on me how well it utilized its atmosphere. It's a very grim movie, but also just various scenes were just so creatively executed. How it opens with what appears to be a love scene, only for the camera to pull back a little bit, and you realize that you totally misread that situation, or how the film can get really disturbing, like when he first discovers the bags full of body parts, and at the end when they're correlating the husband about to take vengeance with uh, Liam Neeson's character going through the various steps in recovering from his alcoholism, it was very effective. It was moving and disturbing at the same time, uplifting in its own way. And it's like it got to the point where I almost was obsessing over the movie. I really need to see it again. I cannot wait till it comes out on Netflix because I could remember everything about it in almost vivid detail. And it's like, why was I not more enthusiastic when this movie came out? And when I was compiling this list, I wasn't sure if I wanted to include it towards the beginning or towards the end, but then I realized that in a way, A Walk Among the Tombstones left a stronger impression on me than all the previous movies, just because I continue to think about it. Guardians of the Galaxy, John Wick, Edge of Tomorrow, Fury, Nightcrawler, exceptional films. I really, really, really like them, but they haven't stayed within my mind as long as A Walk Among the Tombstones did, which is why I placed it pretty high. Number 3 was a late entry, one that wasn't in my original written list, and I had to edit it in. The Lego Movie, one that really I think surprised everybody who watched it. Hold on. Okay, for a brief moment I was afraid that I wasn't recording any of this, so I had to move my list down just a bit. But Lego Movie, it just made me laugh non-stop. And I was expecting to like this, but I wasn't sure if I was going to love it because the previews kind of underwhelmed me. Like, once this film was released and had like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes for, at first, I think eventually it went down a little bit. But I was like, whoa, I haven't even heard about this. I better check it out. So I looked at the previews, and none of the jokes just really made me laugh very hard. And I was worried that the reviews were going to just get my expectations up so high to when I finally saw it, it would let me down. But no, I was laughing from beginning to end. Every joke just clicked, and it's very fast paced with the jokes too. Sometimes like it'll fit 3 or 4 really good funny lines or sight gags within a single scene, and that scene would transition so quickly that it's easy to actually miss a lot of those jokes. So Lego Movie has a lot of rewatchability because there's just so much in it. Maybe even too much. If I was a kid, this probably would have all went over my head, just because, not because the jokes are too adult, it's just that there's so many of them that my feeble little mind wouldn't be able to keep up. My feeble little mind could barely keep up now. I actually watched this twice, and I wanted to do the second time with subtitles just so I can get everything, primarily because my hearing's not all that great. But I mean, if I missed like 50% of the jokes during my first viewing and I still loved it as much as I did, that just goes to show how hilarious the Lego Movie is. But it also does have a good message with good characters with distinct personalities, and there are some very moving parts. And where it goes, like in the ending, it's like, whoa, that's kind of strange. I was actually sort of expected that because there is a lot of foreshadowing, but I didn't expect it to go quite as far with it as they did. And I think that once again adds to the film's identity. It makes it stand out more, and it has a very safe ending, but it's a perfect kind of safe ending. And I really am interested to see where they go if they choose to make a sequel. So emotionally moving, but also really, really funny. And I thought I'm not really good when it comes to reviewing animated films, but like the CG animation, it was perfect because everything has that Lego texture, and it's consistent with it. So water, it doesn't just look like CGI water. It's like very blocky, as if you're watching, or if you're actually looking at Legos that it's somehow making up into water, into like waves and stuff. And I thought that was really cool. So definitely check that one out too, even if you're not big into animated films, because I'm not really all that big into animated films. Be careful in terms of the hype though, because still my enthusiasm could only once again make you expect much more, and then when you watch it you might like it, but it might not be as good as what you thought it would be, so therefore that feeling of disappointment might override everything else. So with a lot of these films, I always like to say, expect a good movie, not a great one, and then if it ends up being a great one, be happy about that. Number 2 is kind of a surprise for me. The Grand Budapest Hotel. This is the kind of movie that would make the number 1 in most real, like, the lists of most real critics, but I am not a real critic, thank you very much. Grand Budapest Hotel is just a very phenomenally made movie. It has excellent cinematography, beautiful sets. It's a gorgeous movie to look at, as most of the director's films are, but even more so. It's like he went a lot farther in creating an aesthetically appealing film, but also I just thought it had a very nice flow to it. A lot of interesting characters played by great actors who actually have a lot more room to act than they usually do in movies, and that's just it. It kept me invested in the narrative because it just one quirky oddball scene with so many quirky oddball characters, followed by another quirky and oddball scene, that's filled with quirky and oddball characters, and it never really meanders. That's my problem with a lot of the director's works. Like, I was never the biggest fan of Royal Tenenbaums because at times it just got too slow for its own good, and it seemed to have no real direction. Grand Budapest Hotel is much more tightly paced, and it's just an all-around entertaining movie that also is very artistic, for lack of a better word. That's a film that's definitely made for highbrow critics, but even if you're not one of those kinds of viewers, you should also, I think, check it out, because it's so well done that it transcends its base audience, and I think anybody can enjoy it. But the number 1 movie, my favorite film of 2014, is The Raid to Barrendal. Just an awesome movie. I loved The Raid. If the first one came out on this list, it would definitely be high up there, just because it's just non-stop awesome action sequence with great martial arts choreography. And this film also has great martial arts choreography. That's much more diverse, though. You see a lot more different styles, a lot more different weapons and gimmicks, and a lot more use of its locations. But also it had a real ambitious, almost even complex story with a lot more character development, and it was a much different movie than The Raid was. The Raid was just pure action. This one almost seems like it's The Godfather with a martial arts twist. So even the long running time works. I was never bored. It felt like it was a much shorter movie, and it never goes on too long before the next action scene occurs, but the action never really upstages the screenplay. And the director, wow, he really went all out in creating a much more artistically driven film. There's a lot of beautiful scenes that utilize the scenery, which is gorgeous, or the soundtrack, which is haunting and moving and kind of badass all at once. And there's so many sequences where the visuals really jump out at you, but once again they work in perfect unison with the story and the spectacle. It's just, to me, an all-around amazing action flick. And if you haven't seen it and you're a fan of action movies, particularly of the martial arts variety, definitely watch it, even if you did not like the first Raid, because once again these are two very different films. So that's all I have to say. Those were the films that I believe deserved to be watched. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I shall get right on the worst films list. Ugh. So I shall see you guys later. And oh, by the way, just as a reminder, if you want to read my written list where I have a few different insights that it might be a little bit more organized than what you've just watched right now, link will be included in the show more section, and also check out whatever written reviews I have released at the moment. So thanks for watching. Bye bye again.